tell you, this episode of Regards sur le Monde you sent is like a crash course in Moroccan affairs. We're talking economics, social dynamics, the whole shebang.
Morocco is fascinating. It's like they're juggling tradition and modernization at the same time, a real balancing act.
Exactly. And the podcast jumps right into it, highlighting the ups and downs of Morocco's economy. They talk about this period of incredible growth, and then, bam, COVID hits. And they don't shy away from the tough stuff either, like the whole youth unemployment situation.
Yeah, that's a major concern they brought up, for sure. Over 20% of young Moroccans are unemployed, which is a worrying figure, especially considering the investments they talked about in education.
It makes you think about the long-term impact, right? Like what happens to a generation facing those kinds of odds? Knowing your passion for social issues, that must have stood out to you.
Absolutely. And it's crucial to see this within the bigger picture of Morocco's economic story. For a long time, they've been a leader in North Africa. But then you throw in a global pandemic and rising inflation, and it creates a perfect storm, especially for those already struggling to make ends meet.
Right, a real 1-2 punch.
Yeah.
It's a mix of good and bad, though. On the one hand, these serious challenges, but then they bring up Morocco's National Development Plan, this Plan de Développement, with aims for these huge reforms. Everything from building up infrastructure to making agriculture more sustainable, ambitious stuff.
Yeah, very ambitious. But the podcast raises a critical point. Will it be enough? They highlight the need for policies that are inclusive, that don't leave anyone behind. To really thrive, you've got to support small businesses, the backbone of any economy.
And it's not just the economic side of things, is it? This podcast dives into the social and political scene in Morocco as well. One thing that caught my attention was the whole discussion about the Moudawana, their family code.
Right, the Moudawana, big reforms there.
It's huge. It's been praised as a big leap forward for women's rights in the region. And I know how much you care about social progress, and I figured that must have piqued your interest.
It did, for sure. I mean, Morocco has made some really significant progress on women's rights. You can't deny that. And the podcast makes this point, too. There are still these ongoing challenges, right? They talk about freedom of expression, political participation, areas where there's still work to be done.
It's a journey, not a destination, as they say. And speaking of challenges, the podcast doesn't shy away from some of the internal tensions within Morocco either. They bring up this Hirak du Rif movement, which I thought was really insightful. It illustrated that gap that can exist between the central government and regions that feel overlooked, like in the Rif. One suggestion the podcast offered was this idea of giving more autonomy to these regions, advanced regionalization, they called it, as if to say, hey, maybe that could ease some of the tension. What are your thoughts on that? Is it really a cure-all like some people think?
Well, it has potential, give it that. The basic idea, giving regions more control, it sounds good on paper, but as a podcast hinted at, the real challenge is in the execution. They mentioned that implementation has been slow, and to do it right, you need this balance, You want to empower the regions without weakening the sense of national unity. It's a tough needle to thread.
Finding that sweet spot between central power and regional autonomy, not easy. The podcast also touches on Morocco's international relations, and it seems like they've been strengthening ties with Sub-Saharan Africa and the EU, really stepping onto the global stage, making moves on a global scale. But let's be real, you can't talk about Morocco's place in the world without talking about the Western Sahara. It's the elephant in the room, right?
It's definitely a complex issue, no way around it. The podcast does a good job, though, of explaining how Morocco's strategy comes into play here. I mean, they've become a major player in Africa. We're talking big investments, driving economic growth. And on the Western Sahara issue, they've managed to secure some serious international support. The U.S. recognizing their sovereignty over the territory, that was huge.
A real game changer, and of course that hasn't sat well with everyone. Algeria in particular comes to mind, right? Supporting the Polisario front, it just adds another layer of complexity to an already messy situation.
Exactly. And it really highlights I guess you could say the missed opportunities when it comes to regional cooperation. The podcast really seemed to lament this idea that the Maghreb region, with all its potential, is being held back by these unresolved conflicts, especially the Western Sahara.
So much potential just waiting to be unlocked. What could be if they could find a way to bridge those divides?
It really underscores the significance of the Western Sahara issue. It's not just about land, it's about unleashing the full potential of the entire Maghreb region. Economic growth, security, stability, it's all connected. But finding a way forward means dialogue, compromise, a shared vision for the future. None of that's easy.
It's a powerful reminder. that even when countries are making strides in some areas, like Morocco, with their economic development, there can be these deeper geopolitical issues holding them back.
Absolutely. It's a complex world out there.
Isn't it, though? Well, this has been incredibly insightful. Thanks for walking us through all of this.
Happy to do it. Morocco is one of those countries that constantly keeps you guessing, and that's what makes it so interesting.
That it does. You've given our listeners a lot to think about. So, to everyone tuning in, here's something to ponder. Morocco's social landscape is unique, and they've made some real progress on things like women's rights. As those values continue to evolve, what potential conflicts and opportunities do you think might arise in the years to come? Something to chew on. And until next time, keep exploring.